I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
Captain Ahab, from the very famous book by Herman Melville, Moby Dick, wasn't the only one with a singular obsession that hounded his thoughts and kept him up at night. Entrepreneurs often have their own white whales, causing them to pace their offices thinking of only one thing. Your concerns may lack the drama of whale hunting, but whether you're worried about keeping up with the competition, building your business, implementing a new idea, or making sure your vision is realized, you must avoid falling into the Ahab syndrome. There is a thin line between dedication and unhealthy obsession. Well, fiction can teach the modern day business person about leadership and courage, teamwork, change management, and obsession, and a variety of other characteristics about leadership. And unlike watching a video or a movie, reading fiction causes the reader to place themselves into the story where they feel what the characters feel, and they have to deal with ambiguity and nuance. Reading fiction is great for leaders because it teaches, it builds empathy for others, and it causes the reader to draw connections and to think more broadly. Melanie Bell is the co-founder of Strategic Peace, a company that helps B2B businesses generate outstanding revenue growth by bringing together their marketing, sales, and service teams around an information-driven customer experience built on the HubSpot platform. Melanie is an active angel investor and mentors the student accelerator programs at Rice University's OwlSpark and the University of Houston's Red Labs. She is also the president of Marketing Interface, a company created in 2014 before Strategic Peace. Well, here we are onto her role and her passion, her love actually around fiction and leadership. She is not only just about marketing. Melanie founded Leaders Who Fiction while operating her marketing strategy and technology consulting firm. At Leaders Who Fiction, Bell is helping people acquire and develop leadership qualities through fiction reading and intellectual business-oriented conversations centered around a select novel. Melanie Bell on the Business of Intuition. Well, Melanie, it's great to have you on the show. And I found your idea, the topic of how leaders can learn about leadership through fiction, to be unique and compelling. And yeah, I guess I have to say my background actually in undergrad did a lot of creative writing, created fiction, never got good enough or didn't stick with it enough to get published. And then I moved into acting, and then that moved me into teaching, and then hence facilitating and coaching. So it was sort of a circuitous route, but it kind of started with writing fiction. And I have to admit that I love reading fiction, and yet I keep reading damn business books. It's like, how many darn leadership books do I have in this office? And I'm curious about it, but I've lost that love of reading fiction, and I'm a first person to admit it. So tell us about what we can learn around leadership or culture or building teams by picking up a good book, a fiction book, and reading it. What have you found, and why did you decide to lean into this so much?
Yeah. So I found there's so much about leadership that's about people, and books are really, a good book is you connect with the characters. And so, the first time I was managing a team, I went to my boss and I'm like, I need some training on this because I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And they said, well, go read psychology books. And I think that there's so much of that gets put into fiction in a really not dry way. It doesn't have to be really technical, but we get so much of a human perspective and understanding other people. And from a neuroscience perspective, they've done studies that show when we're reading, our brain actually switches into stimulation mode. And so we're engaging in this part of our brain where it's not just, oh, I have empathy for these other characters, but we are actually getting practice of walking around in other people's experiences and other people's stories. And so I just think that can be really powerful practice and training.
Wouldn't it build empathy if your brain started to simulate and think that now I imagine myself being in that person's shoes?
Definitely.
So does that also happen when I'm listening to an audio book and driving, or I'm on the treadmill and I'm listening to a book being read to me? Does the same sort of neurological simulation experience take place in that environment as well, or not?
That's interesting. I haven't seen research on specifically on audiobooks, and I'm very pro audiobook. So I'm like, however you can fit this in, it's great. I know that video doesn't have the exact same effect. It's not quite it doesn't switch as far into that simulation mode. So my guess is audiobooks are probably somewhere kind of in between where we would find actually reading a book and your eyes moving over those words and you're imagining what's happening, and then somewhere between that and video. But that's my guess. That's not based on science.
Yeah, no, it's a good guess. But is that why one would say the book was always better than the movie?
Yeah. I mean, that should be part of it. I mean, the other thing is that I think that there's just a totally different experience when we're willing to go invest reading 15 to 18 hours into a book and 2 hours into a movie, and they have to cut out a lot of the good parts to make that work. So, yeah, I mean, so that's part of what just really excites me about this. And the fact that, like you said, it's like you don't have to read another, how many leadership books do we need to read? And a lot of times those business books will tend to show case studies, and everything will be presented as very black and white. And so we as readers can kind of figure out what decision we're supposed to make in that situation. It's not always, there's not a lot of gray area in it. And in fiction, it's all about the gray area. And so as leaders, we're dealing with so much uncertainty and ambiguity. I think that there's a lot to be said for staying in that gray area, in that space, and figuring out how would you navigate these situations that aren't ideal. It's not as black and white as what we read in nonfiction.
So it's a wrong way of saying it, but it's almost like a fun, more multi-shades version of a case study. You blow up a case study and turn it into a piece of fiction. Like some case studies sort of dabble with, Jane worked for this company and she was a manager, and now it's sort of proposed as a piece of fiction in a very limited few paragraphs or a few pages. So I think this is really interesting. So I know that Patrick Lencioni, those of you that know his work with 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and Death by Meeting, these are business books to teach a particular model around something. And yet his brilliance is in that he uses the delivery system as a piece of fiction. You read the book, there's a story, there are characters, there's tension, and in the process you get involved and you start to have that sort of simulation experience of I could be in that situation too. It's not as rich as reading Faulkner, don't get me wrong, it's not like that, but it's pretty darn good, and he's done
Sure. Yeah. And there's definitely a place for all of these books. I'm not trying to get people to never pick up
no, I get that.
Or, that kind of thing. So,
but the idea of the gray area and thinking empathically, simulation if you will.
Yeah.
And we keep saying putting ourselves in other people's shoes. That books do that. And then you get a feeling from it. So now we're tapping into the heart, not just the head, which I think most business books, even the good ones, are not connecting to the emotion of the readers. It's connecting to the intellect of the reader. I don't know. I think you're onto something here. So do you prescribe to the idea that leaders should read fiction, not just because of the lessons that they will learn in the stories in which they read, but in the fact that they become better thinkers and more empathic leaders.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to keep developing skills that we need to put into practice, whether that's empathy, whether that's, I mean, I'm thinking creative problem solving, the communication skills. I mean, I personally, I can tell my writing, even in emails and, stuff for LinkedIn posts, it's better if I've been reading good books. And so there are, I guess, more tangible skills that can get developed as well through this.
So, Melanie, are you also a writer?
I do some writing, yes.
And on fiction or in fiction?
Fiction. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where I'm going with this question, but I'm thinking about the relationship between reading and writing. I remember years ago when I took creative writing classes, it was just a given that if you were going to be in that creative writing class, you had to be a pretty voracious fiction reader because you're learning the craft by being the recipient of the thing that you're trying to create, which is some good writing.
Yeah.
And of course, you learn so much from these masters around how to write by their work and taking that in as a reader. So now my question then is, it appears that we are writing less than maybe we did a few years ago. ChatGPT, for example, I just had conversations today with some people about these researchers at a major healthcare system are now thinking about using ChatGPT as a way to summarize and start the writing process based on already completed research. So now that part of that not duality, but that dyad of reading and writing, we've taken possibly one out of the equation, which is the writing piece is becoming less, favored, or we now have tools that can do that for us.
Yeah.
How do you feel like ChatGPT is going to change our relationship to the other side of that marriage, which is the reader? Will it affect it? Not affect it? Do you see that they are connected? If one is gone, the other one starts to deteriorate. What's your thought?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I know that there's a lot of concerns with writers now about AI produced literature.
Yeah.
Because you don't necessarily have to have it written by a human, although people, hopefully there's some imagination that makes a book, gives it like that kind of extra magic that makes it work, something intangible. Yeah, I mean, it's even a concern. I read actually a couple of years ago when Google introduced it would start to finish sentences, use predictive things to finish your sentences. And it was I read in this article, it was talking about how bland our emails are going to become because we're all just clicking on these phrases for Google to complete our emails.
Yes.
And, I think that there is kind of something that's going to get lost in the efficiency of it all. And look, I've worked as a marketing consultant for the last 9 years, and I do a lot of stuff on marketing technology. And a lot of that has to do with automation. So I appreciate the value that the technology can bring to us. But at the same time, when it comes to communication and writing, it just feels like, to me, I think that we're losing some of our power in communicating here by over-optimizing it.
We work with a nonprofit that's funded by a trust that's connected to ASU. And they're all about creative writing. That's their mission, part of it.
Yeah.
But they're looking at ChatGPT and AI as something not to fear, but try to lean into. I don't think they figured it out yet, but they're not going to run away from it. They're going to try to find a way to, because a lot of their audiences or audience members are going to be younger people or students and so forth. And we got to make sure that we're at least aware of it, if not yet trying to find a way to leverage.
Definitely. And I think that I'm sure that there are times and places when it's going to work really well. I mean, I still feel like when I read a book, it's still helpful to go read somebody else's notes, Google what did other somebody else get out of that book? And then sometimes, you know, they've picked up on stuff that you've missed. So something like AI, you know, it's similar. It's just powered by a different technology.
Right.
And so
Right.
I think that there's a place for it. But yeah, I hope that we're not going to completely have technology just dictating our communications and losing that. But
Right. Well, even before ChatGPT and this whole explosion that started over the last, 6-8 months, we have TikTok now, where you can almost like I don't know, it's almost like video cocaine. I mean, it's just these little snippets of stuff, and you scroll through it. Like, that looks interesting. That doesn't, you know, it's just, I've fallen into that trap. You know, You've got YouTube, you've got all these different streaming sources of material, of storytelling being delivered to us in video or some form thereof. What is your answer to the question of, you know, Melanie, this sounds good, but what do you say to a person who doesn't read fiction? How do you build the case for, I know you've got the ease of video, but what's your ROI? What's the why behind picking up a good fiction piece of literature?
Somebody asked me when I started getting into this, like, well, what if somebody doesn't like to read? I'm like, I'm not trying to convert people into readers. I mean, that would be phenomenal. That would be a great achievement. But at the same time, it's not for everybody. You know, and I think one of the things that I feel like we've gained out of the pandemic was having more of our whole selves show up to work, because we're at home. And so the kids came on Zoom, and all, you know, I'm not going to rehash 2 years of everyone's life, so it was pretty miserable. But I think that for people who do enjoy reading fiction and just need to feel like it's a productive thing to do. I mean, you know, I say it's like, I want to give someone a permission slip to pick up that fiction book if they feel guilty reading it and feel like they should be reading the latest leadership book or that kind of thing. So if I can convert a non-reader, awesome, but I'm not out to do that either.
All right, so let's get into some real examples here.
Yeah.
Tell us about a book, and let's assume that people don't know it, to your point that maybe we're not getting as many readers as we used to.
Yeah.
Tell us about a particular book, maybe some of the characters, you know, briefly, and what sort of leadership or lessons did you derive from that book? Hence the point of what your work is all about, right?
Yeah.
That fiction can teach us something about us as humans, or teach us something about us as leaders, teach us something about us as coworkers. There is this connection. So give us an example.
Sure. So one of the books that I really love that's come out in the last few years is called The Mercies. It's by a British author called Kieran Millwood Hargrave. And it's historical fiction.
And it's called Mercies?
The Mercies.
The Mercies. Okay.
The Mercies. Yeah. And it takes place in Norway several hundred years ago. And the book opens at either Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. And it's in this really small fishing town in the Arctic Circle where we meet, you know, a few families. And the men see a whale come in. So they all are very dependent on whale hunting. So they go out to hunt the whale, and a big wave comes in. And this is based on a true story. And a wave comes, and all of the men in this village are killed, like in one fell swoop. And so it's just women and children who are left in this fishing village. And according to gender norms, they weren't supposed to go fish or hunt whales. They weren't supposed to fix up, you know, work on building houses, but out of survival, they have to do this. So there's a lot of interesting internal politics within this group of women as to how that's going to play out, what values that they're going to prioritize. And then after they've survived for a few years, a pastor comes with his wife from Scotland to set this town straight. And so you get interesting things of, you know, well, what happens when you bring in a leader from outside? How can that either be successful or not successful? And so there's just interesting power dynamics through that book. So that's, to me, one interesting book where it's not as obvious. It's not, a book that takes place in a business setting, then that kind of thing. But, we, as I'm sure you know, like we have throughout our lives, different times where we're working on leadership skills. It's not only at work. And to me, I really like that part of this book.
I get that. So I'm finding that there are some people I run into that look at a piece of fiction or look at a movie or look at an experience in their personal, professional lives, and they are naturally reflective. They are naturally going, ooh, what does that tell me? Ooh, what does that situation inform me about me or about my leadership? Like they take some curiosity, like everything is a lesson. Everything is an indication for growth and learning. And they just walk through life with that perspective. And I would probably have to say that I'm in that camp, right? I remember when I was, acting, and I was Romeo at one day, one summer in Wisconsin. And I kept thinking, God, wouldn't it be cool if we could tell the audience to stay in their seats at the end of the play, the actors come back out, and we have a conversation about what did the audience learn and what did the actors learn, and what does this say about our society and leadership and loyalty and romance and love and all those things. Wouldn't that be great? And I think in some ways, quite frankly, that's what propelled me into wanting to be a facilitator, was those opportunities. So that we have this population that sort of naturally walks through life and sees everything as a lesson. And then I think that there are others who are more take things as they are, black and white, right? They read a piece of fiction, they see a movie, and they just don't think about it translating into a lesson for them.
Yeah.
It's a story about a group of men who lost their lives while hunting a whale, and some women who figured out how to survive. It's had some great characters. I'm done, right?
Yeah.
So is there something in fiction that over time helps us get better at the translation piece? Or do we need some other aids? Maybe it's your program, maybe it's how you work, that helps people take the metaphor, the lesson, and shine the light back on the reader. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think some of it is learning to be intentional about it. You maybe in your creative writing classes maybe found this, I feel like this, where it's like you can read a story 15 times, and when you're reading it for imagery, you get something out of it. If you're reading it for symbolism, you get different things out of it. Or, let's look at the language, how beautiful is the language, how unique are the word choices. And so you can read the same thing and get a lot of different stuff out of it. And what I'm suggesting is that that for people who want to be, you can choose to be intentional and purposefully read through this with that curiosity. And so maybe it's not coming naturally to some people, but when they hear about the concept, maybe the next time they do decide to read a book, they'll go, I could look at it through this lens and maybe get a different reading experience out of it.
So I kind of hear what you're saying is that the more you read, the more that ability, that muscle to draw connections increases. Because you might be seeing new things the more you pick up a book. Okay, I think I understand what you're saying about that. Changing the subject a little bit, I've had a lot of people who kind of come on this show and they say, well, I want to talk about storytelling. This trend that we're in, where leaders and people are working on brand, and you've been in marketing endeavors before. Like, what's the brand of the company? What's the brand of the leader, and how do they tell their story? And we're in a world now of authenticity is so important, and you just tell us something, we may not believe it, but if you connect to our heart, if you tell a good story, evokes an image in our mind, we feel something, we're probably going to pay attention and not be distracted by our TikToks and so forth. Does reading fiction make us better storytellers?
In my opinion, yes. I mean, I would think, I don't know how you could help it, but make you a better storyteller.
Yeah.
I mean, at the heart of it, and when I started writing, I sat down, I was like, I'm going to start writing. And I was like, oh my gosh, what even is a story? I mean, it felt like and I've been a big reader my whole life. And it was like, I felt like all of the stuff that I knew just kind of like fell out of my head. And it's like at the essence of it, you have a character who's motivated by something, who wants something. And then you have at least 2 or 3 things that happen to that character. Do they get what they want? Do they not get what they want? And I think as we read more, even if it's subconsciously, we're learning what those patterns are. We're learning, well, what does create suspense along the way, or what makes the story, hopefully people are reflecting on this, did I like this book? Why or why not? And then they can choose something else that will resonate with them, but then hopefully they will take that. I mean, if they're not doing it, certainly something that could be a benefit coming from this.
One of my first guests on this show, I think it was probably almost 3 years ago, her point of view on some aspect of storytelling, and in particular reading, is that it goes back to what you said. It creates that empathy for the character in a unique way. And so I think your point was that little boys who only have stories that they're told of boys and men who are heroes and save the day don't see little girls and women in that same light. But now if you start writing in and it can go the other way as well. This is an example. Yeah. And all of a sudden you have the empathy for the other. You have the empathy for the person who's not me. Maybe it's a person of color. Maybe it's a person from a different economic background. You name whatever difference we have in the world. Now I'm in their shoes. Now I'm in their world because I'm going through the simulator, as you say. Wow, do I have a different perspective? And so I think in some ways travel does that. It's at a different venue, but I just remember being in India or being in China or South America and, reading the newspapers and seeing the people and sitting down and talking with them and asking them about what are you afraid of in life? And you find out it's very similar. What are you proud of in life? It's very similar. I just had such a deeper empathy for people from around the world just from travel. And I think that probably reading does the same thing.
It does. And it transports you, whether to a different place or a different time or both. It doesn't have to be real. I do think it's like getting to travel, but from your couch.
And there's no TSA pre-check.
Exactly.
You don't have to take off your shoes and empty your pockets.
You don't have to. You can if you want.
You can, but it's not necessary. That's great. That's great. I was thinking that from a fiction perspective, that another type of fiction is playwriting.
Yeah.
That, of course, is more of the bare bones. You're not filling in the granularity of the scenes. You're letting the actor instill his or her perspective and the director, and you got the sets and so forth. But I know that in reading Shakespeare, for example, the first time I found it, I like most people did, aside from the iambic pentameter and the meter and having to always be looking up a word, like what the heck does this word mean? It took a long time to get through Hamlet, for example. But when you finally got to the poetry of it, read a sonnet or two and feel the rhythm and the meter and the imagery. It just all of a sudden at some point, and it takes effort with that particular playwright. But when you get there, it's like, wow, that is all of a sudden like you're like Dorothy and you just got full Technicolor there in Oz. It all just starts to show up.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, I don't read a lot of poetry, but I recently was at an event and there was a lot of poetry getting read. And I felt like I could tell after a day or two of it that like the way I was speaking, just even in like a day-to-day conversation with my husband or something, it was like, I can feel the rhythm that I'm speaking at was different. But my word choices were different. And I'm like, oh, this is so weird. But
a great point. The great readers, I think, become better, more articulate, I should say. Their choice of words, their vocabulary certainly goes up.
Yeah.
That's great. So if there's a person who's listening in, says, okay, Melanie, you kind of got me here. I need a recommendation on a book. Maybe it's not the one that you talked about, but something that's like your entryway into fiction. that maybe I can draw some connections back to myself, my life, my work, my leadership. What's an easy entryway into fiction that I might derive some value, but it's not going to be Proust, or it's not going to be E. Cummings, or it's not going to be something like, Greek tragedy. It's not hard, but something easy to get into. What do you recommend?
Yeah. So there's a book called Ender's Game. It's a sci-fi book, and it's by Orson Scott. I think Card, I think, is the author's name. I hope I got that right. I read this book maybe a year after I finished business school, and I remember sitting on my couch, and I don't read a ton of sci-fi, but every once in a while it's fun and different to read. And I just remember reading this book and being like, God, I wish we had read this in business school.
Really?
Yeah. So to me, and it's a really approachable thing. Like you can, like, was I think written actually for like teenagers.
Okay.
So super approachable. But I just really remember reading that book and being like, oh my gosh, this is what we should have been reading, doing our organizational behavior classes and that kind of stuff.
Really? That's a great record. I just pulled it up on Amazon. Yeah, it is called Ender's Game, ENDER''S. It's been around. It's a special 20th edition. And you're right. Orson Scott Card is the primary author on that. And it goes for $13.49. That's a couple of Mai Tais, a couple of lattes over at Starbucks. Not that bad. Okay, and I'm going to have to check it out. But I love the fact that you said that you thought that this would be a great book for people to read, maybe right out of business school, because obviously there's some certain kind of major lessons that came out of that book that you felt were so impactful.
Oh, it's been a while since I've read it.
Here's your test.
I just remember it was that the character who is the leader in the book and his relationship with his classmate, where he's going through this program to save, I think it's to save Earth from invaders, and the confidence that he displayed, the humility that he displayed, I just thought was really well done and well illustrated through that book.
Fantastic. Well, tell us about like your work. How would one connect to you? Programs, workshops. Give us that kind of background.
Yeah, sure. So I started a group called Leaders Who Fiction about a year and a half ago. And for lack of a better word, it's a book club, hopefully a little bit different than just, we're not getting together and gossiping. But it's an online, we meet on Zoom once a month and we pick a book to read and we get together and discuss it. And the people who are in the group are all leaders, or like I said, we're intentionally reading these books through this lens of what are the leadership lessons that we can take away. And so it's an opportunity. I found I'm on the introverted side of things. And so it's helpful for me in terms of networking to come to a group and have something really concrete and purposeful to talk about, less intimidating, meeting new people and then getting to know them. And the cool thing has been that this group has really gotten to know each other. And, we keep trying to add people to the group. So I don't want it to sound like it's this like closed, cliquey thing.
Right.
But it's interesting because you do get to learn what certain individuals like or don't like in books and in stories and that kind of stuff. So it's been really interesting to see that process unfold. But we've got a website for leaderswhofiction.com. The meetings are free to join. So people can just sign up. You're not like, once you sign up, you're required to come to every meeting. You can pop in and come to a few a year if you want, test it out.
That's great. So it's a labor of love then for you.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing a podcast around this as well?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I think that there could be, to me, I could talk about this a lot. So hence why I could have a podcast.
Right.
But one of it too is like, okay, I could, one of the things I was thinking about was like, man, I could read these books and be like, here are the 5 or 10 leadership lessons I took away from this book. And I'm like,
exactly.
Yeah. I know that there are these services doing that for business books. And so it has occurred to me that maybe this would be a good podcast as well.
I think it'd be really compelling. I mean, I'd sign up for that.
Cool.
Yeah, that's
I'll have to
great.
think about it.
Definitely. Well, Melanie, thank you so much for this. This is really a unique,
Thank you for having me.
nice idea. And I really appreciate the fact that you're doing this, and it's re-inspiring me. I bought the book while you were talking. The one that you referenced, the sci-fi one that you just talked about. So I'm going to give that a shot. And then this other book that you mentioned before was called The Mercies.
The Mercies. Yeah.
The Mercies. Okay.
Yeah.
And I know my wife's really big into fictional, historical novels, I should say.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying I wouldn't read it, but I probably would. But I know that she would love that kind of stuff because she's a voracious reader.
Yeah.
She's always out there reading, you know,
That's
and
awesome.
she just goes into other universes, I'm sure. And then she comes back and we have dinner together. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you go, hon?
Yeah. Where was it today?
Yeah. Where was it today? Where did you travel to? That's great. Well, Melanie, thanks again for your time. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.